James K. Galbraith is with us. Am I saying that right? Yeah, I have been mispronouncing your and your father's name my whole entire life because I read, I used to read all this stuff, but I didn't hear it, but in any case.
If you were in Scotland, you could say Galbraith.
Galbraith. Oh, there you go. It's a Scottish name.
Oh, sure.
Oh, that's marvelous. Yeah. Economist Lloyd M. Benson, Jr., Chair in Government and Business Relations, Professor of Government at the University of Texas in Austin, utexas.edu, and you're in town here for a Roosevelt Institute-sponsored gig or event over in the Hart Senate Office building with Joe Stiglitz and Bernie Sanders. Do I have that right?
That's correct, yeah. Coming up later on this afternoon.
So the topic you're talking about is the Greek debt crisis, or the Greek, I call it I would say it's a Greek democracy crisis, but it's both economic and financial, in that the Eurozone has not integrated politically, even though they've integrated fiscally, and it seems like that's a big problem. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's both an economic and a democracy crisis, and it's not just for Greece. It's really a crisis of the entire European system. Mm-hmm. So we have a European Union, which is founded, as the treaty says, on the principle of representative democracy. But within the Eurozone, democracy has taken a pretty hard hit from the terms that have been imposed on Greece by its creditors. And in fact, if you look at the document that the Greek government was compelled to sign under threat that its banking system would be shut down at the start of this month, that document requires the Greek government, for example, to basically get prior approval for any legislation submitted to the Greek parliament from the creditors, even before it goes for public comment. So the effect of that is to say, well, Greece really isn't an independent country anymore in any material sense. It's not sovereign. It has become a colony of the institutions in Brussels and other major European capitals. And in particular,
Germany.
Well, I'm hesitant to lay the blame solely on Germany, because, in fact, there's a coalition of interests that have been imposing this. There's a substantial responsibility from France for the beginning of this very dysfunctional program, and the creation of the European Central Bank also plays a role.
If we were to draw an analogy between the European situation and the United States, would it not be incorrect to suggest that Greece is Mississippi and Germany is California? California puts a lot more into the federal government than it takes out. Mississippi takes a lot more out of the federal government than it puts in. And yet nobody is sitting around saying, okay, Mississippi has to do austerity. Whereas
Yeah, I'm going to be careful about saying anything about California that might infuriate all my Californian friends.
Okay. Well, we could say New York State. I mean, pick your blue state.
But that's entirely correct. The U.S. has the historical good fortune of having gone through the New Deal, the Great Society, and having forged institutions, particularly social insurance programs, but also that we have a unified federal government budget, including the military budget, which distributes spending power all around the country and makes it so exactly that the state of Mississippi isn't solely responsible for the welfare of the people who live there. They get Social Security, they get Medicare, they get Medicaid, they get unemployment insurance, they get all kinds of protections that they get the earned income tax credit that tend to even things out. So while Mississippi isn't as wealthy as New York or California, the actual differentials in the U.S. are much less than they are between, say, Germany and Portugal or France and Romania.
So the situation in Europe is actually worse than it is here in the United States.
Once you start moving things to the level of the continental arrangement, the situation in Europe is really unstable. It's
so doesn't that argue for one of two things? Either Europe becomes basically one country and becomes like the United States, becomes a federalist system, which is not going to happen any day soon, because every country would have to surrender their sovereignty, or they stop using a common currency. Or at least the marginal economies start using the peripheral economy.
What the Greek government, the government of the Syriza coalition that came into power at the end of January, tried to do was to find a path between those two alternatives. And this was something that Yanis Varoufakis and myself and another co-author named Stuart Holland were proposing, which was that working within the existing European treaties, we could set up some of the mechanisms to get public investment into the countries that need it, to get social insurance where it was needed, to deal with banking problems, to deal with the problem of an unpayable public debt. And so that was initially the hope that there might be some path that could be done legally, could be done within the existing European treaties. What we found is that politically there was no interest, no appetite, no willingness to reconsider the path that they're on. And so having stuck to that path and having really crammed it down the throats of the Greeks over the last 5 months, the Europeans are in a position, they're really still on a trajectory toward one of the two things that you just mentioned. Now, they're clearly not going to get a federal state. That's what the German finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, actually would like. And he's an
that would essentially be Germany winning World War II.
No, that's not fair.
We now control the
No, that's not fair.
Okay.
Germany is a fully functioning democracy. It just happens to be the core of the European Union, which has all of the industrial powers concentrated there.
We'll continue this conversation right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
James K. Galbraith is with us in the studio, and we're honored to have you, sir. One of our nation's, and I'd say one of the world's most competent and well-known economists,
Thank you.
And just extraordinary work. He's here for a Roosevelt Institute gig with Joe Stiglitz and Bernie Sanders over in the Hart Office building. And just to wrap up our conversation about Greece, we were talking off the air about the J curve, about when expectations diverge from reality. That at some particular threshold, that's when revolution happens. And I was asking you, and you were in Greece. I was asking you, are the Greeks moving down that road? Are they getting close to a J curve breaking point, as it were?
I think that's already happened in important ways. The previous Greek system was an exchange of parties between two, center-left, center-right party, both of which have collapsed.
Right.
And the result was the rise of a left-wing party, which had never before been in power, the group of activists and ecologists and trade unionists and college professors.
It's as if Bernie Sanders won the White House.
It is exactly as if. And the extraordinary thing is that very shortly after the election, the approval ratings of that government reached about 80%, and they haven't fallen that much. They're still well up there. I mean, if there were a new election, there's no question that Syriza would be returned. Alexis Tsipras, it turns out, has become the last man standing in Greek politics with very solid popular support, even though he was forced to capitulate on the economic policy questions. And there was a real sense in the rest of Europe that they could perhaps force this guy out of power. But now the world is coming to grips with the fact that this is, I think, likely to be a long-term phenomenon and very likely to spread to other countries eventually, that we're going to see new political forces and progressive political forces on the rise as people begin to say, really, we've had enough.
Is that the rise of progressive political forces in Europe, which has been basically embracing Thatcherism, what we call Reaganomics here, for the last couple of decades anyway?
30 years, yes.
Yeah. But I mean, in a really big way.
True.
I lived in Germany in '86, and they were just starting to make that transition with like their healthcare system and everything. I mean, it seems to me that this slamming down Greece is about regime change more than anything else.
Yeah, that was the idea, and that term was used. It's a very ugly term. We used it to describe what we were going to do to Saddam Hussein.
Right.
It's been used by certain people to describe what they'd like to do in Iran or Syria. But this is a democratically elected country, a NATO ally, a member of the European Union. It's a preposterous term to use in that setting. And people who tried to do it discovered that they got their heads handed to them politically in Greece. So it's the Greek people, I think, really gave a terrific political shock to this neoliberal, basically reactionary consensus, which is in control in most of the other countries.
So does that mean that Thatcherism has passed its prime and it's doomed?
Oh, long past, past, and we're now seeing the the implications of the basically non-viability of that system in Europe.
So Greece was a emperor has no clothes moment.
Definitely so.
For the European
and remarkably, what the Greeks had going for them was a clear vision of why that was the case. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the reasons why Syriza rose so rapidly, is that they could read for themselves. This was the work, basically, of Yanis Varoufakis and his contribution. And I think it's been a pleasure working with Yanis.
He's been pushed out, though.
He's back on. He left. He left the finance ministry because he could not put his signature onto the terms of surrender.
Right.
But he's still in Parliament, and he's definitely still a force to be reckoned with in Greece.